Okay, I think we can get started. There's still folks joining, but I think as we get started and run through the agenda, we'll have the majority of folks join. Welcome everybody to our Healthy CUNY virtual forum on ending housing insecurity and homelessness at CUNY. We are really pleased to be hosting this event today and welcoming our speakers and you all to this conversation about this really important topic at CUNY. And I'm just going to quickly run through the agenda and then I'll introduce our speakers and we can get started. So I'll introduce, our speakers are from across CUNY and outside of CUNY for a varied perspective on this topic. We're going to hear from Dr. Freudenberg, who will review some of our recent data on housing instability and homelessness, excuse me, at CUNY, among CUNY students. And then we'll hear from our featured speaker, Dr. Rashida Crutchfield, and we'll have a panelist, some responses from our panelists and from their perspectives where they sit at CUNY and beyond. And then we will open it up to an audience Q&A. You will see at the bottom of your screen, or you should see at the bottom of your screen, a Q&A symbol, and all of your questions and comments can be put in that in that Q&A section, and we will be collecting those to respond at the end of the session. And we hope to get to everyone's questions, and whatever we don't get to, we will certainly respond in writing and send out an email after the event. So that is our program today. And I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our distinguished speakers. First of all, we have Dr. Rashida Crutchfield. Dr. Crutchfield is an associate professor of social work at Cal State University in Long Beach, and her recent study and research focuses on college students facing homelessness. And then as part of our panel, we have Anne Shaloff, and Anne is the Chief Executive Officer of the Neighborhood Coalition for Shelter, which is a nonprofit organization providing housing and supportive services to New Yorkers who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. And then next we have Dr. Walik Boone. Dr. Boone is the Student Life Manager and co-founder of the Transition Academy at Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn, one of our CUNY schools. He also conducts college workshops at Medgar Evers for students who are homeless, facing eviction, and for those who are food insecure. Welcome, Dr. Boone. And we also have Isabella, an undergraduate student at Medgar Evers College. She's in her sophomore year at Medgar Evers, majoring in biology, and she and Dr. Boone are acquainted because Isabella is one of 16 Medgar Evers students who are currently participating in the NCS Scholars Program that Dr. Boone and Anne Shaloff will be speaking about soon. And last but not least, our moderator, Dr. Nick Freudenberg, is the founder and faculty director of Healthy CUNY and a distinguished professor of public health at the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. He's worked for many years to plan and implement and evaluate health policies and programs that improve living conditions and reduce health inequalities in low-income communities and in New York City and beyond. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Nick, to moderate and get us started.
Great. Thank you, Patty. And welcome to all of you. Good afternoon. We're so pleased to really begin this discussion of housing of CUNY students and looking at CUNY students who are facing housing instability or homelessness. CUNY students and their families, like other folks in New York City, are facing a cascade of housing problems with the end of the moratorium on evictions that came about as a result of the pandemic, many CUNY students are worried about whether they're going to be able to pay their rent, whether they can stay in the place where they're living now. And we're concerned about that both as a challenge to them as human beings, and the compromise of the right that we all have to have decent housing, but we're also concerned about the effect it will have on their academic success. And CUNY is an institution, like so many other universities, serving low-income urban students, students from communities of color, recent immigrant students, first-generation students, are facing, exacerbated by the pandemic, really a challenge in maintaining enrollment, retention, and graduation rates. And now more than ever, CUNY has to look at and come up with solutions to address the problems of our students who are facing housing instability and homelessness. And that's really the purpose of our session today, to begin that conversation and to invite all of you to join with us at Healthy CUNY, whose mission is to promote health of CUNY students in order to support their academic success, to begin to come up with some short-term and longer-term solutions. So just some definitions that we'll be using today. Homelessness has been defined as people living in a place not meant for human habitation, or in an emergency shelter, in transitional housing, or leaving an institution where they are temporarily housed. It is the end point of a continuum, and we'll show you numbers in just a few minutes. Housing instability has been defined by the Centers for Disease Control as having trouble paying rent, overcrowding, moving frequently, or spending the bulk of your income on housing. And this is a much more prevalent problem. In Healthy CUNY surveys, we've called those who said yes to any of those questions highlighted in yellow on this slide as being housing unstable. And could we have the next slide, please? And here are the alarming numbers that 39%, these are based on surveys conducted in May 2022 by the CUNY Office of Applied Research Evaluation and Data Analytics at the central office. 39% of CUNY students face some level of housing instability. 39%. And you can look at some of these numbers. The yellow shows you for all 25 CUNY schools, the green for community colleges, and the blue for senior colleges. So the proportion who've actually been homeless, this is in the last year, is about 5% of community college, less in senior colleges. Now, again, remember that there maybe 250,000 students at CUNY, so 5% of the 100,000 at the community colleges would be 5,000 people. That's a lot of people, even though the percentage is small. For every one of those people, it's a life crisis. But think of those 39% who have to deal with living with others beyond the capacity, in other words, in too small a place, crowded, having to move in with other people, or being unable to pay their rent. So this shows you the dimensions of the problem we're dealing with. And in the 15 years or so that I've been studying CUNY students and their health, we found that the strongest predictor of other health problems and of academic problems is facing housing instability. Students who are unstably housed are more likely to be food insecure, to have depression, and quite a bit more likely to have academic problems. That's why we're here today, to figure out what we can do to bring these numbers down in the short term next year, but especially in the longer term, that we can aspire to having every CUNY student housed over the next period. And with that, I will, with great pleasure and honor, turn it over to Rashida Crutchfield, who probably knows as much or more about students facing housing instability as anyone. Rashida, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Nick. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. I am an associate professor in the School of Social Work at California State University, Long Beach, and I'm also the executive director for the Center for Equitable Higher Education. And our center is focused on research and evaluation to study and promote economic, food, and housing justice in California. For a little context, I want to offer that I am a part of this California State University system. In California, we have 3 segments of public higher education. Our community colleges, of which there are 116. In the CSU, where I land, we have 23 campuses, which is over 480,000 students. And then our UCs, which are our more research-focused institutions, and there are 10 campuses. I'm going to talk a bit, I'm going to put some context around the information that Dr. Freudenberg just offered, and also give us a little bit more information about how homelessness and housing insecurity really impact our students. I am an academic, and so therefore are predisposed to being long-winded, but I'm going to try really hard to confine these comments, though, because the real meat, the real importance of this conversation comes with our powerful panel of folks. So I'm happy to try to put some parentheses on this context. Next slide. In the next slide, I just offer that for context, across the country, about 14% of students experience homelessness. The numbers are similar between 2- and 4-year institutions, but community college students generally have higher prevalence rates. In California, though, in the next slide, you'll see that 1 in 20 of our UC students experience homelessness. 1 in 10 of our California State University students experience homelessness. 1 in 5 of our community college students. So again, we in the CSU are the largest comprehensive higher education institution in the nation, and almost 11% of our 480,000 students experience homelessness. And that's even higher in the community college campuses. The study that we did provided this information for the CSU. So I'm about to provide you data from our system, our CSU system-wide study on basic needs. You know, the K-12 system, so in education, the K-12 system has long known that we need to look at the whole student in order for children to learn. So we have known that we need to feed students and ensure that they have housing stability in order to be their best selves in the classroom. And in higher education, for some reason, we have for a long time thought that somehow all of those problems magically disappear once they leave K-12, but that is not the case. I know that for many of us in higher education, we worry about mission drift, that our focus is on education in the classroom and then the construction or infrastructure around that education. But we are learning, and actually learning particularly from Healthy CUNY, who was among the first to really help us start to understand this. And it's been my pleasure to amplify those learnings since then. That if we don't look at students as whole beings, as holistic beings, and acknowledge their student human rights, that we can't educate them. That if our mission is student success, we also have to be attentive to their needs around food and housing. And clearly COVID let us know that we also needed to be attentive to childcare, Wi-Fi, and the range of things that students must have in order to achieve in education. And in the next slide, Gabrielle from Cal State University Dominguez Hills tells us how her homelessness impacted her learning. Next slide, please.
It affects my studying if I don't know where I'm going to go. Where am I studying? Or Am I concentrating on studying because I'm not worried about where I'm going to go?
So Gabrielle was amongst the many students that we interviewed as a part of interviews and focus groups for our CSU study. Her mother was living in public housing, and she was living in her car, and her sister was sometimes living in public housing with her mom, but was not permitted to live there. And so for Gabrielle, the one place she could go was which was her mother's house. She didn't want to go because if she went there, that put her mother at risk of being evicted from public housing. So all of them were experiencing these issues. This fallacy of the college student being someone who's fully supported by family and is coming straight through high school is not evident in the populations of students that we are receiving. And so we get to adjust our perspectives on who is in the room and what is our mission to serve them. In the next slide, we found in our CSU study that students who experience homelessness experience a great deal more stress and physical complications and challenges if they're experiencing homelessness. They're less likely to be able to do all of the things that they are tasked to do, but they, however, are more likely to be working at least one, sometimes two, if not three jobs, along with going to school. And all of those things make it really difficult to learn. We did have mixed outcomes for GPA. And this is the helpfulness of having a mixed method study, because I anticipated really low GPAs for our students experiencing homelessness. And in some cases, they did report that. In other cases, we found students who had high GPAs because their institutions of learning was their safe place. It was the place that they had structure. It was the place, if the campus was responding to them, where they could find support services. But they were always going. So I talked to so many students who were going to campus as early as possible, staying on campus all day, or going to work and coming back to campus and staying as late as possible, because that was the place not only where they were getting their education, but it was also the place where they were finding food, social supports, and other areas of resource. My question then is, what is the longevity of that? How long can a student be running on zero to make sure that they're making sure that ends meet? When we go to the next slide, we'll hear from Elizabeth, who is from Fresno State University. Elizabeth had a financial aid package because she was coming in under-resourced, and she had savings and a little bit of support from her mother. But what she found was, and the thing about being in California and talking to folks in New York is, I lived in New York for some time, and folks have things to say about us California people. And I do too, because I'm not originally from California. But what we do have in common is the high cost of housing. And for Elizabeth, the owner of her property decided to sell the property. And so she incurred all kinds of unexpected expenses as she got kicked out. And she talks about how she was experiencing that in the next slide.
Brings couches, a couple nights in my car. Thankfully, it was warm enough to where I'm not freezing to death But when I stayed at a certain friend's house and her roommate was kind of getting annoyed that I was there, I didn't want to overstay my welcome. And I had left that day before showering. And so it really hit me like I don't have a place to shower. Something I would never want to wish upon anybody to go through.
So there's so many layers here in just this brief excerpt. Aside from along with the trauma of experiencing homelessness, along with the functionality and logistics of trying to find a place to stay and finding a place to shower, Also, she's worried about the disconnect for her relationships. So I talked to lots of students, and they would break out that planner and show, like, this is where, this is how I'm pivoting. I'm going to stay with this person. I might stay with my auntie for a couple of days, and I might stay with this partner a couple of days, and then I'll live in my car. That in and of itself is a job. And every time I'm staying with someone, I'm also risking the relationship that I'm hoping to stay and hold and develop. And that too is an ongoing challenge. You can go ahead to the next slide. Here, Yvette from California State University, Los Angeles said, she really talks and is reflective of a lot of students that I've heard tell of how school, again, is the place of safety and support. She said, I think just school is the one thing that kept me up. I feel like I would have gotten depressed or something without it. And we really saw this during the pandemic. I'm finalizing a study right now that included data collection during the pandemic. And for some students, that meant they went to places, as their campuses closed, they went to places that might not have been safe for them to be, or they lost their anchor. For many of our students, some of the things that they are told is that if they could just save, or if they got a job, I think that they would be stabilized. And I think that is connected to this narrative that students are somehow just not managing their resources well. And I'll tell you, it's spring break next week, and I might not manage my resources as well as I should. So there are reminders that I need to have, just like anyone else, about managing my resources. However, I cannot make a penny a dollar. And so our unraveling and recreating our narrative about what students are experiencing and then what our role is in supporting them is fundamental to movement in this way. In the next slide, go ahead. Daisy was responding to someone who said, look, just save a little bit every month and that will help. And when we did our survey, we asked students what they were doing with their money. And we hesitated to do that in part because it's insulting to our students. But, after doing this work for a while, it sometimes manages to make itself in the press. And when something that I've done is in the press, I try not to look at the comments, because looking in the comments will ruin your whole day. But when I do, often people will say things like, well, if they just saved, or if they just learned. But what we found was over 70% of the students who were asked, what's going on with your money? It was, I don't have money. I don't have money. And Daisy says, I don't think you're listening to me. I can't save money. I could put away that money, but then I'll make sure I don't eat some dinner for certain days a week, or at least for 2 weeks, to try to save. Saving is not my problem. Next slide, please. So the slide here I borrowed from John Burton Advocates for Youth. So shout out to Debbie Rauscher at J-Bay with her permission. We have to address this issue of homelessness and housing instability, but it has to be a multifaceted approach. Many of our campuses are starting with small and large community-based emergency resource programs. And I'll talk a little bit about what that can look like in some ways in California. We also have the opportunity to leverage homeless housing. So our housing providers often are not seeing our students as a part of their population. And then if we in higher education are also not seeing our students who experience homelessness as someone we need to serve, they're falling through the cracks, right? So we do have to leverage and access our connections to community-based agencies like those we're going to talk about today, to really harness the full availability of resources. Clearly, the best case scenario is that our institutions would build housing and we would have housing for our students. But we can't wait for that to happen. That takes a long time, and not just time and not just resource, but enthusiasm and support for it. So we also have to partner with our housing providers. We have to make a commitment to partner with our community-based agencies who are the experts in this work to make this happen. But it doesn't happen overnight. On the next slide. Even in California, where folks think that we're this bastion of liberalism and we can do things and we think about people, well, I guess we do, but we still have lots of work to do. In terms of academia, this happened relatively fast, but we still have a lot of work to do. Policy in California helped ensure that students who experience homelessness have priority access to on-campus housing. And that was incredibly helpful, although not all students can afford on-campus housing. In 2016, policy provided and ensured access for showers for our students experiencing homelessness. Again, this slide, I'd shout out to J-Bay. 2016, we got homeless liaisons, and primarily homeless liaisons, in this case in 2016, were in financial aid. And there are costs and benefits to that we can talk about in the panel. In 2019, we were funded for a program called College Focused Rapid Rehousing. And this is a bit of a misnomer. So if you are aware of homeless services out in community, this is not rapid rehousing as we know it in community-based strategies. It is college-focused rapid rehousing. The funds go into our public education segments and then are distributed to our institutions. And I will get to that in just a second. In 2019, we had our first infusion of funds to support basic needs more broadly. And in 2021, we got ongoing funds from the state. And we are going to cling to those funds as our budgets shift. And we are hopeful for the budget priorities in the future. And then in 2021, we've also had an investment in college housing construction. On the next slide, I'll be very brief. But generally speaking, a lot of our campus programs are very focused on emergencies. So we often have a three-pronged approach to addressing basic needs and security, so food, housing, and finances. Often this includes some sort of food response. All of our campuses have some layer of food pantry. And for some that's a small food pantry, and others is more robust. We in California call SNAP Cal Fresh. And so there's a complicated road for students getting access to public benefits such as Cal Fresh. And so often our campuses provide Cal Fresh application assistance to ensure that they can get Cal Fresh if they're eligible for it. Our housing responses have largely been emergency. So if campuses have housing on campus, we might put students experiencing homelessness on campus for anywhere from a week to 3 weeks, usually at the longest. But the state investment in college-focused rapid rehousing has changed the game for us in many ways. And then, of course, there are emergency grants. In the next slide, Madeline just put in the chat a report. I am, along with my colleague Jessica Wolin at San Francisco State, leading with many other faculty colleagues, and leading an evaluation of this college-focused rapid rehousing. So that is a partnership between the campus and a community-based agency that's funded by the state to ensure that students get wraparound services and subsidies for their housing. But I'm going to let Anne talk more about the program that's happening here and all of the creative great work that's happening. A couple of things before I go. In the next slide, I want you to know that students who have access to support services experience greater mental and physical health, They're able to work fewer hours so that they can focus in on that learning process. They have more money to pay bills, are able to study longer, and are able to attend classes as their full selves. Always, as I talk about our responses to these issues, is that I want to elevate that we must also evaluate our effectiveness. In part because we have a responsibility to those who have given us that funding, but in real ways to ensure that we're doing what we say we're going to do for students. Because when we fail them, we break their trust. So in the next slide, I just will point out that there are opportunities. I think that sometimes prevalence studies stop us from moving forward, and there is a lot of information out here that allows us to know that this is a problem. So, prevalence studies are definitely a part of this picture, but can't be the only part of where we stop. Evaluation and research can be formative in that we find in our evaluation processes that we're able to help our partners, our programmatic partners, structure themselves so that they know what kind of data to collect, and also it helps them determine how they want to proceed in some ways as a part of that evaluation. But also we want to look at the outcomes. We, as an evaluation process, get to really think about what are the real outcomes that we want to see, and how are the steps that we're taking getting us to see those outcomes. Very briefly, just in the next slide, some of the ways that the Center for Equitable Higher Education is feeding into this work is, as I said, we've done our CSU study on basic needs, currently evaluating programs and services, and also better understanding the experiences of students, not just in the CSU, but also in our community colleges and outside of the state of California. As we think about, next slide, please, the opportunity for growth in this area, I want us to try to avoid small scale thinking. Often we can be very shallow in our depth as we think about what we can do. We know that we can feed students. That seems like something we know we can do. Housing is harder, but that doesn't mean we don't do it. And so we have to make that investment in moving that forward. We have to look at financial aid and how that is supporting, or how can we navigate financial aid policy to support the well-being of students, and also consider where financial aid in our policy can get in the way, and work with our financial aid administrative partners in figuring out the best ways to navigate these roles. Often, though, I find when we are in higher education, we have opportunity to be creative, but it's easy to lean back into a charity model that adds red tape for students to get access to support. We can feel a lot of sympathy and then not mobilize, but we have a responsibility to put real paper, pen and paper together, real heart into action. So in the next slide, I'm just asking us to think about how do we think about who needs these support services the most? How do we use the data that we have through financial aid and other entities to determine who are the students? We know that our students who have been under-resourced are more likely to need these services than anywhere else. And we know we have the opportunity to find them. I'm going to lift up Ruben again. I think he's in the space, but he said one of the things that really struck me and stays with me is that if we can use data on campuses to find students to require that they pay their fees, we can find students using data to ensure that they get the support services that they need. That information is here. It is our job to harness it and move us forward. So I'll give one last shout out on the next slide to our work, but Madeline again put the report in the chat. please reach out to the Center for Equitable Higher Education as a trusted source for information and partnership. And I want to yield the floor to our important panel. Thank you, everyone.
Rashida, thank you so much. That was wonderful and just what we needed. And your final list of the 8 ways to think about new directions, I'm hoping that can become our to-do list at CUNY, that we can begin this discussion about how we can move that forward. And a question I'm asking you to think about now, and I'll ask you to respond to when we get to the Q&A. If you could tell us a little bit about how students, faculty, housing activists persuaded your governor and legislature to actually put funding into this, to make this a priority. Those are lessons that would be very useful to us here in New York. We're going to move now to the panel. You have heard Ann Shaloff is the CEO of Neighborhood Coalition for Shelter. Dr. Walik Boone is the Student Life Manager and co-founder of the Transition Academy, and Isabel Zaldana is a student at Medgar Evers College. And both Walik and Isabella are part of a new venture that Ann is also part of housing students at Medgar Evers. Ann, I'm going to ask you to start and tell us a little about some of the ways that Neighborhood Coalition for Shelter is working to create housing options for college students in general and CUNY students in specific.
Thank you, Nick. And also thank you, Rashida, Dr. Crutchfield. That was an amazing presentation. I appreciate it. Neighborhood Coalition for Shelter is a community-based nonprofit that is a housing services provider. We provide supportive housing for primarily chronically homeless individuals. So we are not a part of the CUNY ecosystem. We're not educators, but we're housing providers. And one of the populations that we serve is young adults who are homeless or have aged out of foster care. And we've served them for about 10 years. And some of them have gone to school while we've been serving them. And we've seen the challenges that they experience, and we've assisted them and supported them through these challenges. And so when we learned about the statistics of homelessness among college students, and then specifically among CUNY students through a report that the Hope Center released a number of years ago, we thought, well, this is a challenge that we can address. You know, this is something that's in our wheelhouse. So we set about learning more about the issue and the challenges. And I must say that people in this area, including people on this panel, were very generous with their information and knowledge. And we determined to start a residence for unhoused college students or housing insecure college students. And we determined to start with CUNY because CUNY for generations has been the gateway to the middle class, has lifted up generations of New Yorkers. It's a place where people are working to better themselves. And so we thought, well, this is the place where we should start. And we actually connected with Dr. Boone and the Transition Academy because of the great work that they've been doing on the Medgar Evers campus. And we worked together in focus groups to get more information. And we, in October, launched a residence where we are housing 17 students and growing as we speak. We're taking on more units and more students, primarily from Medgar Evers, but also from LaGuardia Community College, and some directly from youth shelters.
Great, and thank you. Walik, tell us a little bit about what made you at Medgar Evers and your college begin this venture, and what have been some of your successes and your challenges in this first period.
Thank you, Nick, for having us. So back in 2017, we got word that we had students here on campus that was hungry that was homeless. So we put together a committee of staff members, students, deans, etc. We wanted to tackle this issue head on. We established the Transitional Academy. First, we was just thinking about homeless students. We created a intake form so we can assess them. And what turns out, it opened up a can of worms. It wasn't just that homelessness was impacting students' academia. It was lack of clothing. It was students food insecure. It was students sacrificing, eating, purchasing a Metro card to get back and forth to school because they look at a higher education degree to further themselves in life. It was students here that was lack of childcare, as Dr. Criswell mentioned. So we wanted to do something for our students and make sure we keep them on track, graduate on time, and improve their living conditions. And some of the successes is that over the past 5 years, we have about 60% of our students have graduated. About 70% we have retained for the next semester.
Say a little more about this housing site, and then I'm going to turn to hear about it from Isabella as well.
In regards to Anne?
Yes.
So we definitely appreciate Anne and her team for reaching out to us to help to connect the dots where they came to us with this great idea. However, with certain components that was missing where we sat down, myself and my boss, Dr. Kane, to help to bring it full circle. As Anne alluded to, we wanted to hear directly from the students because oftentimes decisions are made without hearing from the students. They need to have the seat at the table. So we had a focus group to hear from the students, and they helped us to figure out what are their basic needs that they need to achieve academic success. And once we began to get the answers from them, this is when the new pilot was launched. And as Anne alluded to, we have our students there that's doing very well.
Great, thanks. Isabella, we're so happy to have you here. Tell us a little about your experience with the NCS program. What are NCS scholars and how has it affected your life as a student?
So this whole program, I have been at Medgar Evers. This is my second semester at Medgar Evers. And I moved out here to Queens in October. I can definitely say that my life has completely flipped to a 180 for a positive change that I most definitely needed. I've always had my education as my #1 priority, that I was going to make it through one way or another. This is like the first time I'm actually hearing like the meld of like CUNY come together on this. And I think that's really powerful because Medgar Evers was not the first school I was at, it was Hunter. And even still being in the CUNY system, how these numbers and ways and outlets, how even though there is housing instability, students will still find ways, make ends meet. There were still resources and outlets like Transition Academy and NCS that we can reach out to. I think that more resources and outlets and conversations like this definitely need to be had. And I'm eternally grateful that these conversations are being had.
And you said that this new opportunity turned your life around. And I wonder if you could explain to those of us who aren't students, and students might understand it without explanation, how does having good, safe housing make it easier for you to do well in school? It sounds like an obvious question, but clearly some people need to hear that.
Sometimes the obvious and the simple questions are so blatantly right in front of you, it's hard to address. When you can just actually get good sleep and actually have a place where you could study and work and get to where you need to be, have the resources and the necessities you need to just keep going. I think was said earlier, like how long can you keep going until you kind of like run out that burnout time. I can personally speak for me, it's not that much time. That's why I had to find a different source, a different outlet. It was less than a year, and I transitioned to a different school completely. These are definitely, when you have like a space that you're in, you realize how much clarity you have to actually fulfill the needs that you need to do, just like getting homework done, having that space you need to do to get what you need to get done. There's no greater impact I have than just the space, and I'm grateful for that.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to come back to you and slightly switch gears. You know, you and I talked a while ago now, right? More than a year ago. And I wonder if you could say, both as a housing expert and also from your experience with creating this housing for Medgar Evers and LaGuardia and other students, what do you think are the opportunities here in New York City, and particularly what are the opportunities for CUNY of the longer run thinking of having housing options for students who are either homeless or facing housing instability? What thoughts do you have about developing a long-term strategy to meet those needs?
So I think, you know, we have the challenge, and places in California will have it as well, that, you know, this is an urban environment. So we don't have dorms. We don't have a lot of space for dorms. So it's a bigger challenge than, you know, it would be perhaps at a big Midwestern school where you could, you know, simply keep adding to your dorm space. What I would love to see happen here is largely what's happening in California, where I think we need to have government step in and join the partnership. Right now, we've got CUNY, we've got, you know, Transition Academy, we've got the community-based organization, NCS, that sort of parallels what's happening in California, but the third partner is missing, which is the government. And I would love to see them come in and fund housing for students, make this something that they recognize as a necessity. Right now, it's extremely challenging for students to get any kind of government support. When we talked about what housing instability looks like among students, they're tending not to show up in the homelessness statistics, right? If you're sleeping in your car, or you're sleeping at a friend's house, or, you know, going, you know, couch to couch, you're not showing up in anything that's going to get you any kind of support. And so I think what we really need to see is government become a partner in all this and fund housing for students. I'll go a little further and say, I don't think it is the responsibility of the college to be the housing provider and tackle homelessness. You know, the colleges are generally not equipped to. It's not your job, in the same way that it's not my job to educate people and confer degrees. But I think that working together, we can ensure that the basic needs of students are met.
So I'm going to ask you, Rashida, some of these same questions, and again, seeing if there's some lessons from California. When we talk with both university officials and elected officials about housing for students, I think from university officials, we often hear the term, I think you use too, of mission creep, you know, and what they say is we have a hard enough time educating our students. We can't take on the additional task of providing housing. So my first question is, what do you say to that? And then when we talk to elected officials, what they say is everybody in New York City is facing a housing problem. You know, we lack affordable housing. We have 30, 40,000 new immigrants who need housing. We have a deteriorating public housing system that is in need of repair. The supply of affordable housing is getting smaller rather than bigger. How have you heard those same two things, and how have you responded to those?
I definitely have heard all of those things. And I think it's really, I want to acknowledge that those are real issues, right? Like California is definitely, we have more people experiencing homelessness in California than anywhere in the United States. And we also conversely have really high housing costs, irrationally high housing costs. And I can have a longer, this is a conversation we could have all day, or for a full semester. So again, I'm going to try to hold myself in, but say first that as educational institutions, I think we have to acknowledge that we're already responding to students who experience homelessness. I think that people think as if there's a new population that's coming in that we don't want to address, but that's not the case. Our students are here, right? Our students are already on our campus doing everything they can to get the degrees that help them achieve the social and economic lives they want to achieve. And I, can talk about the ethical and emotional need to respond to students who are working so hard. And that's truth, and that's there, and it's truth to power of our students. Often when I'm talking though to legislators and administrators, I want to talk about the return on our investment. That when our students achieve, they support our communities. More often than not, our students who are suffering the worst are most likely to report that they're going to return their ingenuity and their innovation back into the communities from which they come. And so when we choose to make them a priority, we also are choosing to make ourselves that priority, our communities that priority, our institutions that priority. I think for California, we got there in part because we had, often when we're talking about these issues, folks want to know the numbers, but they don't want to pay to get the numbers. Like, collecting data and providing research has a cost to it. So there's an investment in there too, to make sure that we have the information we need to really understand the choices that we're making. And I would say that we got to this point in California because we had, at the California State University, we had a Chancellor Timothy White, who invested in this study. And I have asked him, like, why did you do this? Because he was a chancellor of our institution, of our 23 CSU campuses. And he wanted to know how many students were experiencing food insecurity and homelessness. And then our students, who are our activists and our leaders in policy change, took that information right back at him and said, how dare you try to lift up my tuition, and how dare you not address these issues? And I said, Chancellor White, you armed them with this information. And he said, that's my job, is that if I want to support students, if we want to achieve our mission of seeing students graduate, then we have to do this, and we have to be sure that the students have the tools that they need to hold our feet to the fire and stay committed. Because, California made these investments, and it's now for the advocates in California to make sure that we stay focused in on the promise that we've made to our students. I'll come down off my soapbox now, sorry.
Thanks.
Nick,
I know those soapboxes. Walik, I have some practical questions for you. You and Medgar Evers have done as much as any CUNY campus to address the housing needs of your students. And so could you tell us a little, how did you decide who to send to the new Long Island City housing? Were there more people who needed help than you could serve? And how have you come up with a range of solutions at Medgar Evers to meet the varied housing needs of your students?
First, I have to thank my interns all over these years. So it only been me for the past 5 years running this program with interns, no other staff member. So just think about that. So big shout out to all of my interns over the past couple of years. Secondly, how we identify the students is we do an intake when they come in to be able to assess their needs. And then we do follow-ups to make sure if they have some form of housing instability. Based on the responses that we get from them, we decided if they feel they are fit for it, because we notice a new pilot program and we want to make sure we put our best foot forward. Some programs might not be for this person. However, we also partner with other programs like the Jericho Project, like Brooklyn Youth Center that help with independent living. So we have a whole list of partners that myself and interns have been stockpiling to make sure we meet the needs of our students here at Medgar Evers College.
Great, thank you. We're going to open it up for questions soon, and we ask you to put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can. But I have another question for you, Isabella. We heard from several of the speakers that it is critically important to get the voice of students as we design housing for students. And if we can be your messengers, if we can take what we hear from you to the leaders of CUNY, to the chancellor and his staff, and to the board of trustees, tell us what we should say about why meeting the housing needs of students is important from your point of view.
Why are we questioning that it's not important? You want your next, generation of work leaders and forces to keep going, keep running, all right? And education is how and what you need to get there. So the question, why do we need it? Why is this issue taking so long to address is the real issue here.
Yeah, why do we even need to ask that question? Thank you. I wanted to invite you to put questions in the Q&A, Madeline. I don't know if you've opened it up yet. And I also wanted to tell you about some work that is just beginning, and we welcome your thoughts and suggestions on this. We're beginning a new venture on the Bronx campuses, Hustos, Lehman, and Bronx Community College, called CUNY Cares, which stands for Comprehensive Access to Resources for Essential Services. We chose the Bronx because we didn't think we would get the resources to do it on all 25 campuses, which would have been our preference. And we thought by doing it well and carefully on 3 campuses and evaluating it, we would be able to bring evidence both to the city and state legislatures and the mayor and the governor and the CUNY leaders that addressing the range of needs of CUNY students would enable them to do better and would enable us to increase our graduation and retention rates. And many of you probably know that CUNY moves more people out of poverty and into the middle class than any other university system. And even though that's true, it is also true that only about half the students who enter CUNY actually graduate. And we think one of the reasons for that is that many of our students face health and social problems, including housing instability, food insecurity, mental health challenges, lack of access to healthcare. And so we want to show in the Bronx, we chose the 3 Bronx campuses to get started because the Bronx, as some of you know, is the poorest county in all of New York State. So there was a lot of need there. And also there are many dedicated folks already working on these issues on the Bronx campuses, as is also true at LaGuardia and Medgar Evers and Brooklyn College and Queens College and many other places. And one of the characteristics of CUNY Cares is we're hiring a housing specialist to serve the students at the 3 Bronx campuses, but also to establish partnerships with housing providers in the Bronx and citywide to create clear pathways from the campuses for students facing housing instability into the programs. And I see a few of you from Hustos and BCC and Lehman are here. Welcome. And we are really excited about learning from you how best to meet those needs of your students. So we're hoping to hire this person by September, and we're hoping to learn some things that will enable us to better meet the housing needs, first of CUNY students in the Bronx, and then of all CUNY students. And we're certainly looking to you, Walik and Isabella and Anne, for giving us some guidance from the experiment you're looking at. Let me see, I'm encouraging you to put questions in the chat. And I wonder if any of you, Rashida, Walik, Isabella, or Anne, have questions for the other people on the panel?
Not really a question, but more of a statement. I appreciate Dr. Crutchfield presentation. Of course, you know, I'm an alum from USC, not too far from you, and I read a lot of your work. I incorporated a lot of your work, and what you have been echoing, it's the same thing in New York City. We just in a different place. The same thing is going on where our community is lack of funding, and our students are suffering because of it. The money is going one place and we getting hit with something else. So I just want to acknowledge that the same thing that's going on in California is going on right here.
Yeah, we're sitting in solidarity, my friend,
Yeah.
for sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate your kindness, and I'm also inspired by what you're doing. I wonder if it might be helpful for our audience for you all to talk about how you know, like, I think that in higher education, we often say we want to build partnerships with community-based agencies, and we don't necessarily know how to do that and do it well in a way that is sustainable. And I wonder if you can share a little bit about process, because I think there's this thought that it's easy to just connect and then it happens, but that's not how it works. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about your journey.
And if I can add to that, because I think it's part of the same question, Walik, someone asked, does every CUNY campus have a transition academy? And if not, you know, how did you do that at Medgar Evers?
That's a definitely good question. You know, I was placed in the position, the campus seen something in me to lead this initiative, in a sense of, as I alluded to earlier, I'm very passionate about giving back to my community because Medgar Evers College have done so much for me. So it's only right for me to give back, understanding that as a student as well, I experience food insecurity. No one wouldn't know. You don't know what food insecurity look like unless a person self-disclose. So building up the Transition Academy, as Rashida would know, a lot of our students hide in the shadows. They don't want to feel embarrassed. They don't want to tell their business. So you have to be able to create different campaign strategies to bring them from the shadows. So oftentimes what we do is go into the classrooms, give presentations, and let them know who we are, where we at. And key to it is letting them know your information is confidential. Only how we reveal any information unless they want us to advocate for an issue for them. And we started building up from then. We do tablings. We partner with different organizations. I'm a firm believer, I know we have some social workers here, in system theory. One organization, one person, one system cannot solve this wicked problem that we call homelessness amongst our students. So it's all about developing those relationships, not just external as well as internal. Despite some of our offices operating in silos, we become the liaison for our students. And what Rashida spoke about earlier, our students are faced with trauma. And if a student comes to me asking for one thing and tell me their story, we already know they faced with homelessness. So living in unsafe places can trigger some form of trauma. They should not have to constantly tell that story over and over again and go to another office. So as the researchers as well as Rashida write about, that you have to create that single point of entry office that allow the students to share that information right there, and you become their vehicle to get them the resources to meet their needs so they can stay on track, graduate on time, and improve their living conditions.
Thanks, Wally. Isabella, someone asked you, what would you suggest to students who are experiencing housing instability or homelessness? And what do you think they need to know?
Majority of people who are living in the city of New York, I would say, are facing some type of housing instability. And definitely finding a resource like Dr. Boone and Transition Academy is most definitely useful. I would say any CUNY campus, a CUNY campus is a CUNY community. And most definitely when I went to Medgar, I found that like this Medgar community that they have over there with Transition Academy there to help you. And I can't speak the same for every single CUNY, every single campus is different. But over here, we could say at Medgar Evers College, we definitely have Transition Academy over here to help you find your resources that you need. But ultimately, you got to be the one to be on the look on where you can utilize and get your resources and find somewhere else. Look on the campus to where we can have resources and places to look like a Transition Academy.
Great, thanks. I also wanted to mention that we are going to ask you to help us by putting your suggestions in the chat, and we will accumulate them of what suggestions you have for the CUNY leadership about what they can do around housing, and maybe indicate whether you think this is a shorter term solution or a longer term solution, or maybe you have some ideas for both. If you put those in the chat, we will put them together and communicate them to the CUNY leadership. And you know more in totality than any one person does. And so if we can put all your ideas together, we will also post that on the Healthy CUNY website so that you can see the sum total of what you came up with. And when we end in a little bit, I'm going to ask the speaker and panelists also to give their thoughts on that question, what CUNY can do. Are there other questions? I see someone here, and I'm going to put you on the spot. Tell me if you are willing. Sean from Young Invincibles. Hey, nice to see you here. I wonder if you could say something about how Young Invincibles, a really important advocacy group for young people, thinks about housing instability and homelessness among college students, and whether folks here might be interested in learning about some of your programs. Madeline, can you let Sean speak?
I can. Let's see if that works.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Madeline. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Miller. I'm with an organization called Young Invincibles. We're a national nonprofit dedicated to amplifying young adult voices in the political process to secure economic opportunity for our generations. In New York, myself and my predecessors have been working on the issue of students' basic needs, especially housing insecurity and homelessness for a while. The primary way that we do this is by, as Isabella mentioned earlier, trying to uplift young adult voices. But specifically, we have them meet with our legislators, right? So we have a annual advocacy day in which we bus our young advocates, representing CUNY, SUNY, private higher ed institutions. We bus them up to Albany and schedule meetings for them to talk with folks, especially folks who are on the Assembly and Senate higher education committees, to share their experience, to share what it's like, going to CUNY right now, to share how different it can be, especially when students transfer. We've had a number of students who have, for example, gone from community colleges where they have a lot of these wraparound services, right? Places like Medgar Evers Transition Academy, to Hunter College, where a lot of the same support services are no longer available, especially now that the single stop contract and services have been discontinued as of 2020. One of the bills that we've put forth to address this specific issue, I want to make sure that I uplift and put on folks' radar. So this is a bill that we're calling the Homeless Liaison Program. And basically what it does is it would provide funding for folks like Walik to be able to have those same kind of services at CUNY and SUNY schools, prioritizing schools with the greatest proportion of housing insecure or homeless students. And it would create a position which would be a liaison for students who are experiencing housing insecurity and homelessness, to provide them with services and resources, to connect them with city and state resources, and to advocate on their behalf. As has been mentioned, this is a really hard thing for students to talk about. The way that we're able to get students to open up about this is, in our program, we work very diligently to create a safe and brave space for students who are dealing with food insecurity, who are dealing with housing insecurity, to be able to open up, about their experiences. But that takes time. It takes a lot of building trust, and to get them to, talk about it themselves, especially with elected officials, can be really intimidating. But we're hoping with this legislation to advocate on their behalf and with them, to provide dedicated funding for these services. So if you're interested, please let me know. I can drop my email in the chat. We also have a Basic Needs Coalition, which is going to be a statewide group of folks that are working on issues like housing insecurity, food insecurity, and lack of access to mental health resources. So that coalition is going to be meeting starting on Monday at 4 p.m. If you're interested in getting involved, please reach out, and we'll add you to the invite.
Thanks, Sean. And Rashida, I understand that role of a housing assistance person, that's part of what you achieved in California. How is that working? And maybe after you answer that, you can come back to the question I asked you earlier. Together, how have you educated the policymakers in California to get them to appropriate money to meet these needs?
Pressure. Students and advocates like Young Invincible. I think it's coalition building, right? And also finding someone who understands that need. And it's helpful even in California to have bipartisan understanding that when you have students who are moving towards college education, that's hard work, but it's also real work, and it's investment. And I say that as if it's easy, because it's not, and it takes time, and it takes relationship building and leveraging and support and coalition building. It's not an easy thing to do. In terms of liaison, we had basic needs liaisons. So essentially that often meant for us that a lot of what happens for students in terms of grants and supports outside of financial aid still goes through the financial aid office. And there's advocacy to be done in terms of unraveling the complexity of financial aid for students, because even when we support students, then we can impact their standing in financial aid. So for instance, if I provide a grant for a student, that can impact how their financial aid is disseminated to them. So those nuances meant that for a lot of us, the liaison went through financial aid, which is sometimes wonderful when you have a wonderful ally in a financial aid administrator. But our financial aid administrators are not social workers, and often bring a lens of gatekeeping to the work that sometimes can be a barrier to the social and economic supports that our students need. We have had campuses that have homeless liaisons or housing liaisons, which can be really helpful, particularly if there's housing. So one of the opportunities for a housing liaison is both to prepare the field. So when there is housing, to really support the receptiveness of the owner or the manager of the property. Our students, along with experiencing discrimination because of their economic stability and credit viability, but also their race, ethnicity, gender identities, all of those things, they experience oppression in those ways. They also can experience discrimination just because of their status as students. Homeowners will find that they will accept someone, and then the student says that they're a student and somehow the rent is higher or it's not available to them. And that liaison can, when it's available, smooth some of those things. And they can also prepare the student to be a strong neighbor. Yeah, I will pause there and jump in.
I just wanted to raise something that I don't think we've said very much about, which is the fact that we're dealing with homelessness and a housing issue with these students, but there was also the issue of how they came to be homeless and what the impact of homelessness has been. And in our program, and I think in any program that's going to be working to house these students, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that some of them have encountered homelessness or housing instability because they have been the victims of abuse and neglect and had to leave their previous housing, or because they're LGBT plus and have been thrown out of their homes or had to leave, or they've been in foster care. So there's also this range of experiences that they bring to the housing and to their situation, so that when we think about housing homeless students, we also have to think about the additional services that they may need and how those can be provided. And that is, I would say, not the responsibility of the college, but it is something that as the housing provider, we're certain to make sure we have the services available. And I think that's something in any partnership, you want to make sure that the community-based organization providing housing also is able to address all of these other issues as well as basic needs.
I have another question, and maybe it's for you, Ann, but maybe others know as well. Are there any federal, this is a question from Amy Ellen Duke Benfield, and are there any federal housing dollar rules that could be changed to bring more money for low-income housing to college students?
Well, one thing I know is that the low-income housing tax credits that typically finance a lot of housing developments are not available if you're a full-time student. We can't house full-time students in our Lewis 9 house, our young adult residence, because of the way that building has been financed. I think also we really want to look at the whole voucher system and think about how students can use that, or how that can be used to fund housing for students. And I understand why there's a reluctance to give Section 8 vouchers to students, and there's the theory that people are going to just not work and use these vouchers. But if you look at the students that we're talking about, these are clearly people who are going to work and work hard and could benefit from federal support. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at also.
Good. Thank you. So I think we're going to wrap up now. Thank you all so much. And I have a closing question, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to take maybe a minute. And the question is, and I'm again going to invite all of you to give your answers in the chat. What do you think CUNY leaders should do in the next year, 2 or 3 to better meet the housing needs of CUNY students? And Isabella, we're going to start with you, and then Walik and Rashida.
To better meet the housing issues of students.
Yes, to better meet the housing needs, both for those facing housing instability and those facing homelessness. What actually should CUNY's leaders do, in your view?
In my view, I think CUNY leaders should definitely make it a whole prevalence that housing is an issue. Like in California, it's more of like a dorming option. But here in an urban community, we definitely need more of a housing option. It looks a bit different. And we definitely need to address it as that issue that it is.
Good, thank you. Waleed, your thoughts?
So first, in order to address it, you got to be able to identify it. You have to be able to know where the students are at. Because if you don't know where they're at, you can't address it. So the solution is to replicate the Transitional Academy in all campuses, or what we're doing here, in which we centralize all that information into one office. We provide a confidential and safe place for our students to seek services. Our motto is TACT, T-A-C-T, interacting with students in a sensitive manner. So the T stands for trust, gain students' trust, so they no longer have to hide in the shadows, which will allow the Transitional Academy to assess their pressing issues. A stands for advocacy, advocate on behalf of marginalized students to ensure their basic needs are met. C stands for confidentiality, assure students that information shared is confidential. And T, transparency, very important, ensure students that whatever you're sharing or any decisions that's being made, you want to let them know what's going on. And one thing, you have to be a fully staffed Transitional Academy, a director, a social worker, a housing specialist, an employment specialist, food pantry coordinator, data analysis, social work and psychology interns. Now, I say that to say this. Besides the interns, I play the role of all those characters, and it's not sustainable. So I'm appealing to CUNY, give Meg Evans College some money. Let us hire some more personnel, and we can show you that we can take it from here all the way here. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Waleed. Anne, your thoughts?
I would lift up what Waleed said. I think we need a Transitions Academy and an NCS Scholars Program available to every campus. I think that's not going to happen overnight, but I think we really need to advocate for this kind of program along the lines of what Rashida and what's being done out in California. We can't let housing insecurity derail students' progress to the degree or credential that is going to allow them to overcome housing insecurity. I think there's a great economic case to be made, and for support for this. And I think that that's really something that CUNY needs to advocate with the state and the city for. And I think I'll stop there, but that's the priority.
I feel like Dr. Boone landed the plane there.
Yeah.
I'm there and I'm with it. I'm over here cheering. I'll just add to make sure to evaluate what we're doing and so that we can hold ourselves accountable to what we're doing, and we can hold ourselves accountable to the investments that have been made, and that process has to be integral from start to finish. But that feels anticlimactic. I feel like we need to go back to Dr. Boone.
Well, we had a high point there. I wanted to summarize some of what I heard from you, and I have to admit some of my thoughts are in there too. I think the first thing is CUNY needs to acknowledge that its students face serious housing problems, and it is an obstacle to achieving our academic goals. And you can't solve a problem you don't acknowledge. And I think, at least in the past, CUNY has sometimes been reluctant to put this problem on the table because it seems so overwhelming. The second suggestion, and I think this came from what several of you said, but certainly Rashida and Anne, we need the government in this mix. We need the New York City government and the New York State government. We're in the stages of negotiating our budgets. The current budget that the governor put out called for a tuition increase for students rather than freezing it, and even further going back to the way when I was a student at Hunter College, when we didn't pay tuition, that would put dollars in students' pockets to allow them to pay for housing. So CUNY needs to think boldly, and it needs to get elected leaders. And then I think the final thing I would say, we have this amazing asset at CUNY. We have 240,000 students who vote, who live in New York City communities, who are taxpayers, who are the heart and soul of New York City. And CUNY's leadership has to be willing to mobilize those students to tell our elected officials what we need to do our job of educating the children of New York City. CUNY was created for that purpose in 1847, and to do that in 2023 requires addressing housing needs. And I'm so grateful to all of you for being at this session. And we'll be holding our next Healthy CUNY Forum in April, and our focus on that will be another huge and urgent need, which is meeting the sexual and reproductive health care needs of CUNY students. We'll send you messages about it, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.